Hello Exiles! So I have been recently working on a Crackling Lance build, and despite being inferior in every single way when compared to Arc Lightning, I still thought that it has potential. Thus, in today's video, we are going over a fully min-maxed Crackling Lance build with Archmage support and over 11,000 mana for maximum possible damage. At the start, I knew that I wanted to create the best version of this build, and for that reason, I decided to go with the mana stacking Hierophant. Hopefully after watching this video, you can decide for yourself if you wish to push your endgame with this build or not. So let's begin with the Ascendancy. We are a Hierophant with a pretty generic Archmage setup. We start with Divine Guidance, since we'll be stacking mana starting from level 1. We also get increased damage based on our 33% of our mana investment, thanks to Transfiguration of Mind. Next we have Illuminated Devotion. This mod provides us with a minor damage boost while we have Arcane Surge. Then we have Arcane Blessing for the immunity to all elemental ailments while we have Arcane Surge. And finally, Conviction of Power. This mod is completely useless against bosses unless we find another way of generating power charges. Thankfully we get to have that on a shaped wand. We will talk about it later though. But now for our passive tree. This is what your average tree should look like. We don't need cluster jewels since mana is abundant on the passive tree. Make sure to have healthy mind jewel placed on this specific socket to convert all nearby health nodes into mana at twice of their values. Now progressing with your passive tree at any stage of the game is always going to be the same. You take nearby mana nodes and then push to far away ones. You just want as much mana as possible, wherever possible. And then you go for crit nodes and generic increased elemental damage. Now we move on to your items, starting with Cloak of Defiance. This is a core item for any mana stacking build. It saves us the trouble of manually pathing to mind over matter. It also gives us 1% of our maximum mana regenerated every second. All that in addition to 150 flat mana bonus. Next we have Essence Worm. We need this for Wrath. We can't afford to reserve our mana in an Archmage build since the gem gives us added lightning damage based on our unreserved mana. And with Essence Worm, you get to have an aura socketed into it that reserves 0 mana. For our other ring, we have a rare one with life, mana, and Assassin's Mark curse on hit. This is mandatory in the endgame, but until you can get something like this, feel free to use a second Essence Worm and have Zealotry aura socketed inside. So moving on to our amulet, we have Adiri's Foible. Again, pretty generic item for any mana stacking build. But for our helmet, we have a Crusader influenced base with life and mana, and percentage increased maximum mana Crusader mod. For its suffixes, we have lots of resistances. Next for our boots, same thing, we have life, mana and resistances in addition to a decently high movement speed roll. Feel free to craft increase the effective non-damaging elements since that will amplify your shock effect, which will greatly increase your damage. Next we have gloves. Pretty much the same exact thing as your helmet and boots. Life, mana and resistances. You will need a high dexterity roll somewhere, otherwise you will be forced to invest into it on the passive tree. For belt, we have increased mana recovery rate Redeemer mod, in addition to life, mana and resistances. Increasing mana recovery rate applies to mana gain from all sources regardless. It's an overall multiplier applied at the end of any mana gain effect. Finally, for your weapons, we are using wands mainly because they can roll mana and the power charge generation after spending at least 200 mana. This is a shaper mod and you need it on at least one of your wands. Aside from it, you need as many other critical modifiers and increased spell damage if possible. With that being said, we are done with items. Now let's talk about our gems. For your main 6 link you have Crackling Lance, Archmage support, Arcane Surge, Unleash, and Control Destruction, all those linked with Awakened Lightning Penetration. Generally speaking, it is counterintuitive to use Crackling Lance with Archmage, but because stacking mana is the best way to boost our lightning spell damage, we don't have much of a choice. Anyway, next we have a 4-link setup. Here we have Wave of Conviction and Fist to Lightning support. This will allow Wave of Conviction to deal more lightning damage than fire, and thus apply a lightning resistant penalty to enemies it hits. Alongside it we have Val Righteous Fire and increased duration support. For our move and skill setup we have Lightning Warp, faster casting, less duration, and Swift Affliction for further skill duration reduction. Now, in whatever sockets you have left, feel free to use Arcane Cloak with cast when damage taken setup, a Portal Gem, and don't forget to have Wrath socketed in your Essence Worm to mitigate its mana reservation. Okay, now let's talk about your jewels. Here's an example of what your average jewel should look like. I have decided to prioritize mana over life since we never die as long as we have mana. The rest of the mods are basically crit. Next, for unique jewels, aside from Healthy Mind, we have Watcher's Eye. Sadly, there aren't many good combinations we can have since we are only running Wrath, but feel free to go for increased critical strike chance while affected by it, or generic increased lightning damage mod. For bandits, we help Alira obviously, since every single bonus she provides is useful for us. For Pantheons, it's very important to get the Soul of the Brine King for the mages, to prevent getting chain stunned. And for the miners, I went with the Soul of Shakari for the poison immunity. And with that being said, we are done with this build guide. So what do I think about Crackling Lance? In my opinion, it's a very awkward skill with less clear speed and single target damage when compared to Arc Lightning. There is no reason to use it instead of Arc, but it doesn't hurt to try this build for yourself since you can swap to Arc later without changing anything in the build. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section and I will try to answer you as quickly as I can.